Hello everyone, I'm Dave Thomas, and today I'm building the Lunar Shuttle model rocket by MPC. And if this looks kind of familiar to you, it's because MPC basically has 3 overall rocket themes, and they mix and match parts and change the colors and things like that, but it means a lot of their rockets do look the same. And so if you've ever built the Klingon Bird of Prey or the Cadet Cruiser, they're based on kind of the same parts that this one is. Nevertheless, they are fun kits to build. So let's just open this up, make sure we've got everything here. Find your instruction sheet, and there's probably things hiding in it. Okay, so we've got the parachute, which we'll have to cut out and assemble. Some decals there. R.E.A.R stuff, always good to join that. Alright, what we need here is the parts list. Alright, so we found the decals here. Here's our body tube, pre-colored and patterned. It's actually one of the things I like about these kits. You don't have to do a whole lot of work after you build them. Fin can, nose cone, and we've got a small parts package here that contains the fins, the engine mount, the shock cord, the shroud lines, shock cord mount, launch lugs, and that brown sheet there has the parachute tape tabs. So it looks like everything is here in the kit, and I'm going to clear things away and we'll get started. Our first task is to assemble the motor mount. And here we're going to make some measurements first of all. Grab my ruler here. Okay, and pick one end and mark it as aft, and I would pick whichever one looks in better shape. Okay, so I'm going to mark it on the inside here, so I know which one goes down. And then we're going to measure 2 inches or 50 centimeters here, or 5 centimeters, 50 millimeters here. Put a mark right there. Okay, and then we're going to take a hobby knife and at that mark make a little slit that's about 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch wide. Just enough for the engine hook to go through. Alright, now they show gluing this. White glue, though, is not going to stick to that metal, so if you want to glue it, what you can do is just put a little dab of gel type super glue right there. Now this motor mount does not have a thrust ring like you see in most kits. It just uses the end of the engine clip as the thrust ring. Alright, and then it asks us to put a piece of clear tape on there. Alright, and we're just going to run this down along the length. You can cover up the super glue if you want. Now you may run into a problem that this may make it really tight once we install this into the fin can, and so we may end up having to trim a little bit back here. Alright, which brings us to the fin can. Now I am not going to do anything with glue quite yet. I want to make sure this thing actually fits. So this is going to go in and eventually flush with the fin can there. And we have quite a bit of engine overhang. That's actually normal for this model. Alright, now you can use tube type plastic cement in this. I actually recommend using the gel type super glue because we're bonding a plastic to cardboard here, and I found that this just works a whole lot better for dissimilar types of materials. So I'm just going to put a ring of this inside here, avoiding the motor clip slot there. Okay, and then I'm just going to put that in and just push that in till it's flush, like that. Okay, and you'll see it's pushed some of the glue forward, and you can use whatever you have handy, an applicator, so you kind of put that down here and make a fillet at the top. And you can add some more glue to that as well. Okay, so I'm just going to run a little bead here and have the applicator in my mouth. That's why suddenly I sound like I'm eating a toothpick. Okay, we'll just run that around there. Okay, and we're going to let that dry for a few minutes. While it is drying, we'll come down here to the body tube, and we're going to measure 2.5 inches or 65 millimeters from the aft end. Okay, so if we go back to our package illustration, okay, the blue end is aft, and we're going to glue on the launch lugs, and I like to do it right along the seam here of the wrap. Okay, so I'm going to measure along that seam and get 65 millimeters is right there. And then we have another one up at 8 inches or 205 millimeters, 2.5 centimeters, right there. Okay, and then what you can do here is just take a little bit of sandpaper. It doesn't really matter what grit, anything between about 80 and 100 and 220. Find the other launch lug. Alright, but because this does have a very glossy finish, it makes it harder for the glue to bind. So we'll just take a launch lug length there, roughly. And I'm just going to use the sandpaper and just roughen it up a little bit. Right where it's going to be. It doesn't take a lot. Okay, and same thing up here, just right along the line. And this is just making a better grabbing surface for the glue. And you can do the same thing on the launch lugs themselves. Just sand one face of it here. Okay, and then you can use white glue or wood glue, or white wood glue. I do recommend a white glue for this instead of a yellow wood glue, simply because the yellow is really going to stand out when it dries. Alright, so here I'm going to apply some white wood glue. We don't want much, just a thin film there. And we're going to attach that along here with it right at that line we made. So we can cover up our little line. Okay, and then I want to make sure that it's straight along the seam there and centered on it. You can kind of look down the rocket. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other launch lug. Can't find where I sanded it, so we'll sand it again here. Again, just a relatively thin bead of glue, and also on the line. Okay. Once more centered on the line. And now I'm going to sight down both launch lugs and the line to make sure they're all lined up. And they are. So now I can let this dry for a little while. Now we'll come back to the body tube and the fin can later on to put those together after all the glue dries. For now, I'm going to cut out the parachute here. Next we'll need the shroud lines from the small package here. And then also these little sticky tabs. So you need to carefully tease this apart, which is a job unto itself. Okay, looks like they've got them pre-cut for us this time. In some kits they just give you a great big long piece of this and you go from there. Alright, so I'm going to take every one of these and line them up and make sure they're the same length. Okay, so up here I've got them all at the same point, and I'm just going to go all down the length, and they're still the same. Excellent. Okay, so in the instructions what they have us do is tie or use one of these stickers to take a loop from one to the adjacent corner, and just do that all the way around. I'm going to do it a little bit different. I'll do two of them that way, so these two sides there, I'll do the adjacent corners, and then the middle I'm going to do a cross. And so if you're used to building Estes kits, that's what most of their parachutes do, and I like that arrangement a little bit more. It just causes a little bit less tangling. Okay, so to do this we're going to take an end and one of these little stick-on tabs. Alright, and I'm basically going to run this more or less around the sticky tab. It doesn't have to be perfect, but something like that. And then I'm going to do this one in this corner here. I'm just going to lay that down and just squash that tab on there, and the line, shroud line, gets caught between the sticky tab and the parachute. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing over here. Okay, so just get another one of the little sticky buttons here. Okay, and in the same manner, just kind of loop it around there. And this one I'm going to put on the opposite corner. Alright, and then I'll pull that under. Okay, so now I'm going to do another one between this corner, and the same thing on the opposite side, but I'm going to do those off camera. I have all my shroud lines attached, and now I'm just going to remove any flash from the eyelet of the nose cone here. Okay, now if you want to go with the kit's colors, this nose cone does not need to be painted. If you decide you do want to paint it, you may run into some difficulties. This feels like polyethylene or polypropylene, so paint's not going to want to stick very well. And so if you do want to paint the nose cone, I recommend a couple of things. One is to sand it all over with 150 grit sandpaper, followed by 220. And the other advantage to that is you'll get rid of these seams here that if you're using the nose cone by itself, you just put up with. And then also use what's called a universal bonding primer. And that helps the paint stick to this fairly repellent plastic. Alright, but I'm just going to go with it. Now for the parachute, I'm going to turn it upside down here, and I'm going to gather all 3 of my shroud line loops over one finger. Okay, and then I'm going to grab the parachute in the middle of the sheet, like this. Alright, and then pull everything taut. Now if this had gone as we had hoped, and everything's the same size, then all these corners should come together at the same point. Alright, but it's looking like one of mine ended up longer than the others, and I'm not quite sure how that happened. Maybe it's because I ran one across instead of around. Alright, but I've actually got here, if I'm holding my corners down where they should be, and I've got 2 shroud lines longer and one a little bit shorter, and that's probably because I did that, running one of them across instead of all the way around the side. So don't do what I did. Okay, just go ahead and run them one to each side just as they show in the instructions. Now, since I do have this, I can overcome it yet. And the easiest way is to simply tie a knot where all of them are still together. So wherever that short loop is, I'm just going to tie a knot here, like this. Alright, and I'm leaving a fairly open area here, because the next thing you're going to do is one way or another tie this to the nose cone. Now, according to the instructions, what they have you do is put all 3 loops through, and I'm only going to use 2 of them. Pass it through there. You might need a little tweezer or a probe, or very carefully your knife. You don't want to cut the shroud lines. Okay, and then you open up those loops again, and then you pass the entire parachute through the loops and pull it taut. Now, I'm not going to do that, and wait for it, yes. If you've ever seen my other videos, I don't like to do that. Okay, instead I prefer to use a snap swivel like this. And the size really doesn't matter as long as the snap can go around the eyelet and move freely. In fact, that's a really big one. I probably only need that one. So here's one that's a little bit smaller. I'll check and make sure it fits, and it does. So to use one of these, we'll just take our loops, and normally you'd have all 3 of them. I'm just doing it with the 2 here. Alright, and then open those up so it's hanging there by the swivel side loop, and I'm going to pull that through, pull the shroud lines down, and taut against it. Alright, now I want to make sure I haven't changed anything. So once again, grabbing the parachute in the middle, all of those shroud lines should be at the same tension there. Alright, if they are, then go ahead and take a little bit of white or wood glue and just put a little tiny dab right on that knot. And just work it in there, and that's just to keep it from coming loose. And I'm going to do another one at this knot so it does not come loose either. And again, if you did the shroud lines right, you don't need this knot right here. Now the advantage of this is that you can take your parachute off, change it out easily, whatever you need to do, and then when you're ready for it, you just snap it back on, like that. Now, especially with this particular rocket, this is a really big parachute for a rocket this small. And unless you have absolutely calm conditions, there's a good chance you'll lose this out of your field. And so when I launch my rockets of the same size, I'll usually pull out this big parachute. All right, even though it looks really cool, I'll usually pull it out and put a 12-inch one on. All right, so I'm going to let that set aside and let the glue dry. Coming back to my body tube, the glue is dry enough now, and I want to put some fillets on it to strengthen those launch lugs. And here again, if you use white glue, it's not going to be as noticeable. So just run a bead along each edge. Alright, you're going to want some tissue or a rag or paper towel handy. Because now I'm just going to smooth that in with my finger, wipe off the excess. And then do the same thing on the forward one here. If you do get this mixed up and you put the forward end on the aft, or get it turned around so forward and after reversed, it really doesn't matter, because there's nothing really obvious that would make one end of this the top and one end of this the bottom. Okay, now as long as we're careful, we can keep handling this. Just try and keep the tube horizontal as much as possible. Alright, now we're going to come back to our engine mount here, or our fin cannon engine mount, and this is going to fit in the aft end like this. And my personal preference is to have the clip in line with the launch lugs, but in this particular kit I can't do that because there's a fin here. So when I put this in, I'm going to stick it between two fins and still have my engine clip as close as I can to the launch lugs. Here again, the instructions call for using plastic cement. I'm going to use the super glue again, gel type super glue. I'm also going to roughen this up a little bit to give the glue more to grab onto. Now, be careful if you do this, because sometimes the glue grabs really quickly. And you get it in halfway and it won't go in any further. Okay, it doesn't require a lot, but again, that's just giving a surface for that glue to grab onto rather than something completely smooth. Okay, so here I'm using the gel super glue again, and I'm just going to run a bead. It does not need to be heavy, but it should be uniform. Okay, and it should be just inside there. Alright, so now line this up again so you get it between two fin mounts there. Okay, and we're going to put that in just like that. Rotate it back and forth a little bit to help seat the glue, and that's already grabbed. Okay, so we'll just leave that there. Next we need the fins. Okay, now here I've got a personal preference as well. So in the instructions they show using a tube type plastic cement to put these in. Okay, I like to do it a little bit differently. So what they have you do is run some glue either along the fin slots or along the fins themselves, and then you stick them in like that. Okay, now notice what's happening. Those don't want to go in really easily, and when you're trying to do that and you've got glue setting, it makes it even more difficult. So what I'm going to do is use a brush-on type cement. This is a very thin viscosity. I'm going to put all of my fins in, dry fitted first. Okay, and you just got to hit the right angle. If you do have too much trouble with them not going in, you can take some fine sandpaper and just sand right along the bases there. That will usually get them in. Or you can sand using, say, an emery board right inside the fin slots. Either one will often help you get them in. Okay, that one's really tight. And if I were to do that while I was trying to get glue in there, there's a good chance it would get stuck. In fact, it's trying to get stuck right now. Right, in that case, I just pressed it down against the table. But it is a good idea, no matter which gluing method you're going to use, make sure you dry fit these first. Now the base of the fin should go flush with the fin slots there in the aft end of the rocket. That one's a little tighter. Okay, Now, here's where the difference is. Instead of trying to apply the glue first, what I've done here is I put those in, and now I just run the glue along the edges. And capillary action will help draw the glue inward. And you don't want to use a tissue or anything to wipe off excess glue of this type. If you do get too much on there, just leave it alone. Once it dries, it's not very noticeable. Okay, and now just let this dry for a few minutes on its side. And while it's doing that, we can prepare the shock cord mount here. So this comes in the small parts bag as well. And you can just cut this out with scissors or a hobby knife. Just to help keep us oriented here, I'm going to label this as 1, 2, and 3. Okay, our shock cord is not very long, and if you have additional shock cord material, I would actually put some more on this. I'd give this probably about twice that length if you had it. I'm just going to go with what came with it though. And so to start with, I'm going to run a bead of white or wood glue right down the middle of this. And then I'm going to put the shock cord at a bit of a diagonal over the 2 and the 3. I'm going to fold the 1 over onto the 2. Okay, and here you want to squish this around so that the glue makes good contact between the 2 pieces of paper and the shock cord. You don't want a lot of air in there. And then you're going to take the 2 and fold that over the 3. All right, and as you do that, fold a curvature into it like this so that the shock cord is on the convex face here. All right, now we're going to add some more glue to that convex face, and this will be the side that attaches to the inside of the body tube. Okay, again, you don't want this dripping, but you do want a good uniform amount so that we don't get a lot of air gaps in it. Okay, now we're going to go to the rocket. And we want this to go down as far as you can get it, at least 1.5 inches so it doesn't impinge upon the nose cone. Right, I'm going to flip this over so now the glue side's against the rocket. Let's see, okay, so you can see it down there. And what we want to do now is press that against the rocket and then onto the hand. Alright, so I'm going to hold my hand, that's right next to my launch lug. I'm going to move that over just a little bit. Alright, so now I'm holding my hand and the rocket and the shock cord mount and squishing them everything together while not hurting my launch lug. Okay. Try and get all the air out of that, and you want to keep that shock cord mount as flat against the interior as you can. Okay, now we can go back to allowing that to dry. And then we'll take the other end of the shock cord, tie that onto the nose cone with a double knot, or 2 half hitches. Okay, and then this free end here, if it's longer than about 5 millimeters or 1/4 inch, cut it back, but not all the way to the knot. We just don't want it getting caught between the shoulder and the body tube when we put it all together. Okay, and then go ahead and put a little dab of glue on that knot as well. Only use white glue or wood glue for this part. If you use super glue or plastic cement, it will melt the elastic. Alright, I'm going to let everything dry for a few minutes and then we'll do the final assembly. Now if you're careful, while the glue is drying, you can go ahead and add the decals here. And according to the instructions, these go on the fins, one on each fin side. You don't have to, this is your rocket, you can decorate it however you want. I do recommend that you wash your hands first to get some of the oils off, which I just did. Okay, and then these can just go wherever you want them. So you just put them on there, push it down. Alright, so that's all of the decals. So all it's left to do at this point is wait for glue to dry. Okay, we can attach the parachute using our snap swivel if you haven't tied it onto the nose already. Okay, but you want to wait until your fillets on the launch lugs and the glue on the shock cord mount are completely dry before launching this. So if you're at this point, I would say a minimum of an hour, maybe 2 hours, but then you can take this out to the launch field and put it in the air. So this kit goes together fairly quickly. I hope you enjoyed doing it with me. Have a great launch and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.